Hey guys, welcome to week two. This is one of our supplementary videos, and we're going to talk about evolution. We simply don't have time, if we're going to be in the Word, to cover the detail and the breadth of this topic, but it's something that you need to know as a Christian because evolution has basically been taught as fact, and it's not. So let's get started. Here's a famous Far Side cartoon way back from '82 showing how the fish evolves into the man who catches the fish. This is the Natural History Museum in Washington, D.C. I don't know about you, but I grew up going there as a child. And when your national government presents something as true, like evolution, and you can see here the exhibit, a father and a son looking, and it shows how everything came from basically nothing and how everything evolved, and we came from monkeys and monkeys came from primordial soup. You believe it. You take it as true. And there's just one of their diagrams. Where do you fit in? You can see that we came on the left there, from the monkeys. We're related to the chimpanzees. We all have this common ancestor. And then on the right there, it shows you the millions and millions of years. And that everything started from a big bang. But there are problems with the Big Bang that no one wants to talk about. Firstly, what started it? Where did all the matter come from? If everything came from nothing with no explanation of why, how, from what, or by what. They're saying that everything came from nothing with no explanation of why, how, from what, or by what. And, now looking back, this takes more faith than believing that God did it. It does. It takes more faith to believe this, that everything came from nothing with no cause, than to believe that there's an eternal God outside of space and time who created it. So you have to ask yourself, which does require more faith? Everything came from nothing, from an unknown reason, from an unknown source, or God created everything? Clearly, it requires more faith, as we just said. So that's an important point to bring out to people that they often overlook when they object to God. Another problem is what's called abiogenesis. That is life coming from non-life, that life simply starts. And the problem is nobody knows how it happened, so how can they know that it has happened? Darwinism must prove that life comes from non-life. And ancient Earth does not prove that life could evolve from nothing. It doesn't help the argument. So simply saying that something is billions of years old doesn't help the argument for abiogenesis. You have to explain how it happened, and that it did happen. Billions of years has been added in millions of years to hopefully think, well, if there's enough time, maybe it could happen. But it's a stretch. Other problems are what's called irreducible complexities. That this is where a single system is composed of several well-built, matched, interacting parts that contribute to the basic function, where if you remove any one of them, the entire system won't work, it won't function. It cannot be produced directly, that is, by continuously improving the initial function, which continues to work by the same mechanism by slight successive modifications over time. It won't work, it doesn't happen. You either have all the parts working together or it doesn't work. To summarize, nothing works till it all works, and this is the case, for example, with the human eye. If you don't have all the parts, it doesn't work. So it cannot evolve. It's silly to say that it did. You can even look at something as a flagellum from a protozoan. You need all of those parts. And look at it, it's like a machine. It's like something you would see in an industrial factory with rotors and rings and membranes and the propeller. I mean, it's crazy. And this is something that's very simple. Natural selection has no foresight and actually works to eliminate anything not providing an immediate benefit. So there'd be no way that this can happen, and it's another example of an irreducible complexity. For those of you a scientist, even if you look at something as simple as the E. coli gene regulation for lactose, it's called the lac operon. This is something that I noticed when I was in cellular molecular biology in college, that this system is so complex and interrelated. You basically have a completely dependent system, an interdependent system, where the presence of the lactose binds to a substance that then goes and inhibits the gene because there's lactose present so that it can self-regulate itself. Crazy. I can't explain the whole thing to you, but another example of there's no way that this evolved. You need all the inner working parts for it to work, or it doesn't work at all. There's also something called information science now that we've realized that the DNA contains not just information, but tons of information. Information cannot be stored unless there is a pre-existent code for storing it. You have to have a code to store it. And there is no information without a code. You can't have a code without a deliberate convention. So all information is encoded and stored based upon a pre-existent set of conventions, rules, and regulations. We know that in binary code, for example, some of the simple computer stuff, it was ones and zeros, and that could encode information. The problem for evolution is that any random set of letters, for example, occurring by chance, would never have meaning without language. If there isn't a code, a language behind it, then any letters in the right sequence don't mean anything. So what this is all saying is, I know it may seem a little technical, is that information is always the result of intelligence. It always has an outside source. Information cannot evolve. And we know that the DNA stores information. It's the most complex storage system that we know of. There's 3 billion base pairs in the DNA of one cell. That's 10 to the 12th bits of information, right? It's digital code. It's like 100 million pages of an encyclopedia. The instructions encoded in the DNA to make a human being in all of its parts. We have 31,000 genes specified 200,000 different proteins. So you can see that there's a lot of 31,000 genes can make over 200,000 different proteins. And it's more complex than any known storage system. And again, information doesn't evolve. One strand of code contains several overlapping instructions depending where you start reading it. In this example here, if you start at A and read, because remember that it's a triplet code, you'd have ATC, but you could also start at the second letter and have TCG. And we found out that it does have layers of overlapping instructions in it depending upon where you start reading the code. And you realized how difficult this is if you want to try and start writing a sentence where the second and third letter, if you start with the second and third letter, you still have a meaningful sentence. It's almost impossible for us to do. There we have the cat ate his milk. Well, if you change where your starting point is, it won't make any sense anymore. Try it yourself with one sentence, let alone several hundred letters. If we look at the DNA, again, just the system that reads the DNA, called transcription and translation, there are 30 proteins involved in the transcription. That's where you read the code of the DNA, okay? And 150 total proteins for protein synthesis, all encoded on the genome. So you have encoded on the DNA the very things that you need to read the DNA and make the protein. And there's no way to explain how they could have evolved because you have to get them from the code, but how do you read the code if you don't have the machinery to make the code? So again, none of it makes any sense. Each amino acid has 90 chemical steps. And again, the decoder is encoded on the code. So DNA really proved definitively that evolution, macroevolution, as purported by Darwin and everything, isn't true. And really, a lot of modern scientists have come to realize that and at least admitted that somebody did something. Now, some of them think it's aliens, some of them think it's a God that we can't know, but they've at least, some of them who are honest have admitted that. Evolutionists claim, some of them still, that DNA is proof of evolution because it's common to most life forms. Creationists counter that, and it's common design, not common ancestry. That's really a silly argument that they have there. There's also something they call junk DNA is supposed to be evidence of evolution. But modern research, again, has shown it's not junk at all, but has great importance and carries information. Again, the DNA information makes their claim impossible. Information never arises on its own. And realize that mutations in natural selection, which was what Darwin talked about, causes new variations in a species, like they change their beaks. We'll look at this. But the information has been lost. It's decreased information because now things have been selected out and they are not being passed on. So the information decreases. And, DNA has its own repair system. So you have to ask yourself, why is there an intricate repair system if mutations are so important? And how could you evolve to have a repair system to repair something by chance? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. If you want to deal with someone who's a scientist and everything, DNA is the place to take them. And there are people who have written about this. Francis Collins, the director of the Human Genome Project, has written a book called The Language of God. He says, think of DNA as an instructional script, a software program sitting in the nucleus of the cell. Now, he doesn't go as far, to say Jesus and the God of the Bible, but at least here's a scientist saying, hey, you know what, DNA proves that there's a God. And it does. There's other arguments. There's the fine-tuning of the universe. This makes evolution completely improbable. The laws of the universe are complex and highly unlikely. Cosmologists have calculated the odds of a life-friendly universe appearing by chance are less than 1 part in 10 to the 10th to the 123rd. Right? That's 10 raised to a power of 10 with 123 zeros after it. The laws of the universe match the narrow band of parameters required for the existence of life. It's very narrow. Even atheist cosmologist Fred Hoyle has said, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intelligence has monkeyed with physics as well as with chemistry and biology. So they admit that it seems like that, but they say, but it didn't. So it doesn't make any sense. So just some of the basic things you need to know about the fine-tuning of the universe. There's something, number one, called the cosmological constant, is tuned beyond imagination. This controls how fast the universe expands. If it were slightly larger, matter would fly apart. There wouldn't be galaxies. If it were slightly smaller, the universe would collapse. There'd be no stars. So the fine-tuning level is about 1 part in 10 to the 120th. It's one of the most precise numbers in all of physics, and it points to God because such precision looks far more like intentional calibration than chance. It's just too unlikely. 10 to the 120th is incredible odds. And the second major fine-tuning universe argument, which is a fact, there's many, there's at least 10 or 15, I'm just trying to give you the big ones, is that the strength of gravity is exactly right. Gravity must be strong enough to form stars and have things come together, but weak enough to prevent universal collapse. If gravity were altered by even 1 part in 10 to the 40th, that's like a teeny fraction, stars wouldn't form or they'd burn too fast for life. And gravity acts everywhere all the time. A wrong value in that gravity strength makes no universe suitable for life. There's a couple other common sense arguments if you think about it. If we are just mere matter, simple chemicals that have evolved from nothing, we're just carbon and atoms and chemical interactions. My question to you is, how can mere matter have self awareness? Or even further, how can chemicals know right from wrong the instant you do something? Think about it. If you're mere chemicals, and let's say you tell a lie to someone, and you feel that in your heart, like, ugh, I just lied, and we all know what I'm talking about, how could the chemicals know that you just lied? How could they know that what you said isn't true? And further, how could they then trigger some kind of reaction to let you know that you just lied and it was wrong? I mean, it can't. How can chemicals have love? Again, they can't. So everybody knows that these things are true. It's just that, as Romans says, the truth is suppressed in unrighteousness. This is common sense stuff, guys, and it's just that the world doesn't want there to be a God. Look what Richard Lewontin, a PhD professor of evolutionary biology at Harvard, says. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs, in spite of the tolerance of the scientific community for unsubstantiated commitment to materialism. For we are forced by our a priori adherence to material causes to create an apparatus of investigation and set of concepts that produce material explanations, no matter how counterintuitive, no matter how mystifying the uninitiated. Moreover, that materialism is absolute. We cannot allow a divine foot in the door. I mean, there you have it. They're admitting it. Here's another guy from Cornell. As the creationists claim, belief in modern evolution makes atheists of people. One can have a religious view that is compatible with evolution only if the religious view is indistinguishable from atheism. Let me summarize my views on what modern evolutionary biology tells us loud and clear. There are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. That's the end for me. There is no ultimate foundational meaning, no ultimate meaning to life, and no free will for humans either. So, I mean, this is what's out there, guys, and this is what's being taught to your kids in college. Here's Richard Dawkins, a world-renowned atheist. He's written the book The God Delusion and The Blind Watchmaker. And in his book, he says, biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. The appearance. Kind of funny because he's admitting that it looks like it's design, but he's saying it's the only appearance of design. So again, suppressing the truth in unrighteousness. So what we talk about when we talk about Darwinian evolution that makes it silly is basically what we call the goo to the zoo to you. Because we have a Big Bang that creates a primordial soup. That's the goo. And then life slowly evolves from the goo to create animals. And out of the animals, we get monkeys, and monkeys slowly evolve into humans. And it's important now to distinguish that what Darwin described is called macroevolution. You can't just use the term evolution because, as we'll see, microevolution, what Darwin described, is true. There are changes that occur within a species, but what he was claiming is that, man can come from primordial soup, and that has never been observed. So macroevolution is the change of non-living chemicals into simple life forms, into more complex life forms, into humans, by natural selection coupled with mutation. We have stellar, chemical, and biological evolution. It's purely naturalistic and it's driven by death. This does not happen. What Darwin basically observed were these different kinds of finches that had adapted to different various environments in the Galapagos Islands. And he said that they adapted and their beaks and everything's changed. And that's probably true. But what everyone forgets to realize or doesn't want to talk about is they're all finches. The finches didn't turn into anything else. And the changes were minor. You started with a finch and you got a little bit of a variation within the finches, but they're still finches. They're not one kind or one type of animal turning into another. It's absolutely silly. And Darwin himself admitted that if we didn't find intermediary forms, then his theory would collapse. Natural selection is a non-directional process where organisms possessing certain traits reflective of their genetic makeup survive better than others in a given environment or due to selective pressure. But it only produces horizontal change, not vertical. And there's a decrease in the amount of information. It cannot provide new information. And it allows organisms to survive better in their environment. And death is its driving force. So this is true, but it in no way helps any argument for macroevolution. This is microevolution, the changing within a species by pressure. And remember the important point. Remember we said that to have macroevolution, to have the goo to the zoo to you have to have an increasing amount of information being put into the system. We know that only occurs by intelligence. And this process that's claimed to do exactly that decreases the amount of information every time there's a mutation because that old gene is lost. So sorry, it doesn't work, right? Darwin's finches resulted from selection of existing genetic material, while goo to the zoo to you, that's GTY, evolution requires new information, right? It's supposed to create new species within the kind. Speciation has nothing to do with goo to zoo to you evolution because it involves sorting and loss of genetic information, not new. New traits are not the issue, but new genetic information, right? We need, just because a finch has new traits, that's not what we need. We need new information to make a new and different and more advanced animal or person. We don't need mutated information. We need new information, and it can't provide it. So it's an unsubstantiated hypothesis, not a proven fact. It requires an increase in information that is novel, not only to that population, but the entire biosphere, and it's not going to happen. You'll see some misleading evidence here. There's Pastor Aaron. I'm not saying he looks like a monkey, but it was a good example. The chimp DNA, they'll claim, is 98% the same as the humans. Aha, you have a common ancestor. You evolved from them because your DNA is so similar to them. Well, no, because what they don't tell you is that 2% of 3 billion base pairs is 60 million base pairs, which equals 20 500-page books of new information. And that's a lot. So again, it's twisting the facts. So the problems with macroevolution, it's not happening now. It's never been observed. There's no evidence it ever happened in the past. None. Billions of known fossils do not include a single unequivocal transitional form with transitional structures in the process of evolving. None. Given that evolution, according to Darwin, was in a continual state of motion, it follows logically that the fossil record should be rife with examples of transitional forms leading from the less to the more evolved, but it doesn't. And it also defies the laws of second law of thermodynamics, that things tend towards disorder, not order. Just look at your car or your house or your desk, and things tend to get disorganized and dirty, not more organized over time. So again, it's not happening now. No one's ever seen it happen. If it's a real process, it should still be happening now. And there's no examples of one kind evolving into a new kind. There's no cogs, a dog and a cat, right? It's never been reproduced in the laboratory. A current leading evolutionist, Jeffrey Schwartz, professor of anthropology at University of Pittsburgh, has acknowledged that it was and still is the case, with the exception of Dobzhinsky's claim about a new species of fruit fly, the formation of a new species by any mechanism has never been observed. Ernest Mayr, the dean of living evolutionists, longtime professor of biology at Harvard, who has alleged that evolution is a simple fact, nevertheless, it is a historical science for which laws and experience cannot explain it. No one can never see evolution in action. Billions of known fossils do not include a single unequivocal transitional form with transitional structures in the process of evolving. Given that evolution, according to Darwin, was a continual state of motion, it follows likely that the fossil record should be rife with these forms, and we don't find them. And the entire history of evolution, from the evolution of life to non-life to the evolution of vertebrates, from invertebrates to the evolution of man from the ape, is strikingly devoid of these intermediary forms. The links are all missing in the fossil record, just like they are in the present world. So it just simply doesn't happen. And the Cambrian explosion has been quoted as the most remarkable event in the history of life. They can't explain it. The Cambrian explosion is something that biologists have noticed, that all of a sudden, boom, there's this appearance of all these different life forms on the earth all at once, and they can't explain it because they don't want to admit that God created it. And I talked about this a little bit, the second law of thermodynamics. All systems in the real world tend to go downhill as this towards disorganization and decreasing complexity. This also precludes it. Let me just show you an example there, right? If you mix up two things in a jar, two different substances, they become, and they're organized, then you pull the, you let them mix with each other, they go towards disorganization, right? And the earth receiving energy from the sun's rays doesn't anything to help this problem. Actually, thermal energy decreases, it increases disorder. So in summary, I know this is a little detailed, but you need to understand it. Macroevolution is a religion, not science. It does not meet the criteria of a scientific theory. It is naturalism and atheism masquerading as science. The natural world proceeds according to its own internal dynamics without divine or supernatural control or guidance, and that we human beings are creations of that process. That's what they say. That is not science. That is a religion. It cannot prove there is no God. They have faith in their belief system with no proof of it. And most of the most prominent evolutionists are atheists. Scientific philosopher and ardent Darwinian atheist Michael Ruse has even acknowledged that evolution is their religion. And you can read his quote there at the bottom on your own. He basically says evolution is promoted by its practitioners as more than mere science, but he admits that it really is a religion. So we're almost done. I know this is a little technical and maybe too much for some of you. That's okay. It's not a main part of the Bible study, but I wanted to make this information available. The last thing I want to talk about, just for the last 6 slides, there's only 6 left, bear with me, is this idea of science. Because everyone will say, well, what about science? And it's not scientific. And, believing in God is against science, and science proves that it's not true. Well, this is another sham that's been pulled over our eyes, and let me unveil it for you. This is very important to know. Okay, so normal science, what science really is repeatable and observable processes observed and tested in the present. That's what science is. It is, in the laboratory. investigating, repeating, and observing and testing live in the present time. What they've done is made another science called historical science. That's where so-called scientists make educated guesses about origins in the past. Guesses. It's not proven at all. And just because they are so-called scientists, they label it as science. They're theories. Science is a methodology. The scientific method, you probably remember this from school: hypothesis, experimentation, results, analysis, and conclusions, right? You're gaining knowledge of the material world by way of observation and generalization. But there's also this science, it can be a philosophy. They've made it into a philosophy and labeled it as science, and that's naturalistic materialism, that everything comes from natural forces alone. There is no God, there is no force, it's just happened by chance. All things are governed only by natural laws. Only natural occurrences of nature occur. There is no supernatural intervention in the world. This is a philosophy. This is not science. It's not a tested fact of science, but a philosophy about science. And what they do is any view that does not conform to their philosophy, they say, is not scientific. And the philosophy of science always wins. The answer must conform to their philosophy. Facts of evolution suggest design, but they've invoked the philosophy. They say, this is what they say: any scientific methodology that suggests intelligent design is summarily disqualified by scientific philosophy as a religion, when in fact what they're doing is a religion. Any denial of evolution is not allowed. It is carved out of the definition at the outset and begs the question. It's philosophically unsound. So what they do, you provide proof of intelligent design. I've shown you lots of proof. Well, what they say is that's not scientific because it violates our commitment to materialism, our philosophy of naturalistic materialism, and then therefore it's not scientific. Well, has nothing to do with science at all. They're just throwing that term on there because the general public, the people that don't know any better, the devil, the demons, the ones behind this that want to send people to hell, know that the average person doesn't know the difference. They won't do their research, and they'll say, oh, well, it's not scientific, so I'm not going to believe it. And everyone believes it. But this whole thing about being unscientific is a lie. It's ridiculous. It's evil. And to label it as science when it's a philosophy, it's a religion, is absurd. But yet it goes on. Science is not capable of ruling out anything, even in principle, about the immaterial spiritual world. It can't physically measure the non-physical, and ruling out what can't be proven by science is circular reasoning. Like, I can't see the invisible man, so he doesn't exist. That's what they're doing. So the philosophy of science, right? Let me just give you some examples. You're out in the field. You find a watch. What would you conclude? Well, gee, there must be a watchmaker. Or if there's a house and you find blueprints, there must be an architect, right? But we have the human body with DNA filled with information, and we conclude, voila, it happened from a big bang. How ridiculous is that? That's what's been pulled over people's eyes. That's what's being presented as the truth, their philosophy, because they don't want to admit that there's a God. To say that a watch must have a watchmaker, a set of architectural plans must have an architect, but then to look at DNA and says it came from a big bang is simply, not being honest. 3 more things. Let me show you this. Some invertebrate creatures in the ancient ocean, right, have all of its parts on the outside. The earliest forms had all of their hard parts on the outside. Somehow managed to evolve into the first vertebrate, that is, say, fish, with all of its hard parts on the inside. This is another thing that people never think about. That the earliest life forms that they claim evolved into the higher ones, they had their skeleton on the outside, and they're saying somehow that evolved on the inside. You tell me how that happened and show me the proof there. And again, let's end with Romans 1. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godlessness and wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness, since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. Right? So the truth being suppressed in unrighteousness, that's really interesting. This word suppressed is steering the ship against the wind intentionally. It's a nautical term in the Greek, and it's basically saying that you're intentionally steering the ship in the wrong direction. That's what's been happened. So I hope this is helpful. I know it's a little detailed, but you need to be at least aware, especially of this last part about when people start talking about science, because you can challenge them on it, that it is not science. I hope that's helpful, and we will see you soon. God bless.